All right, let's jump right into it. Welcome to today's Explainer. Today we're going to unlock a fascinating mystery by looking back at the ancient rules of Buddhist monastic communities. We're going to explore exactly why the excessive pursuit of material wealth becomes a massive roadblock to our spiritual progress, and uncover the deep cultivation wisdom hidden inside these ancient rules. In texts like the 10 Recitations Vinaya, these guidelines weren't just a basic list of chores, they were a highly sophisticated psychological defense system. So stick with me because we're about to see the absolutely stunning contrast between the chaos of excess and the profound peace of strict limits. Before we get too deep, I want you to ask yourself a totally honest question. Do you own your things, or do your things actually own you? Modern consumerism is constantly pushing us to want more, more, more. But here's the wild part. Even 2,000 years ago, ancient monks who literally took vows to give up all worldly wealth still found themselves completely struggling with this exact same desire for more. It just goes to show that chasing material things is a universal human blind spot, and that's exactly where our journey into ancient wisdom begins today. Looking into the historical texts, there's a really intense piece of criticism that stands out. It tells the story of an incredibly wealthy, devout layman named Dharmadinna. This guy was so generous that he'd give the monks anything they asked for. Well, the monks ended up relentlessly demanding these ridiculously expensive needle tubes made out of bone, ivory, and horn. Because the monks knew no limits and no contentment, they completely bankrupted this generous donor, leaving his wife and kids in total poverty. As you can imagine, the everyday people watching this unfold were absolutely furious and heavily criticized the monks for losing all sense of proportion. So what does this all mean? The absolute key here is that the Buddha didn't just look at this and say, hey, this is bad PR for the monastic community. According to the records, this kind of material greed is actually a super dangerous psychological trap. When neither the giver nor the receiver knows their limits, it doesn't just burn through material wealth. Much worse, it completely distorts inner peace. It becomes a massive wall blocking true spiritual cultivation. Material desire is basically a bottomless pit that just swallows up the clear, focused mind a practitioner is supposed to have. To really put the dangers of chasing external things into perspective, let's look at a pretty stark comparison. On one side, you have life in the royal palace, which represents the ultimate peak of wealth and power, but it is totally packed with suspicion, plotting, and danger. On the other side, you have the monastic path, which is all about simplicity, safety, focus, and peace. The ancient texts specifically warned monks that if they got too hooked on rubbing elbows with the rich and powerful, they'd instantly be dragged into all that worldly chaos and completely lose the essence of their practice. The texts actually break down exactly what happens when you get too close to luxury and power, detailing the 10 faults of entering a king's palace. It's honestly fascinating. If the queen just casually smiles at a monk, boom, the king immediately suspects an affair. If the palace loses some jewels, guess who gets blamed first? The monk. If top-secret military plans leak out or a war starts, a monk who hangs around the king is instantly associated with the drama. It perfectly illustrates how getting close to excessive power and luxury instantly corrupts your spiritual focus, replacing it with endless suspicion and danger. And if you want to know how bad this chaos can really get, the most extreme example happened in King Udayna's royal harem. The records describe a genuinely shocking tragedy. The king had given control of a city to a Brahmin named Magandiya. Drunk on this massive new wealth and power and completely consumed by jealousy and greed, this Brahmin actually hatched a poisonous plot to secure his daughter's status in the harem. He intentionally started a fire that burned 500 devout queens alive. It's a horrific, dramatic story that lays bare just how destructive the fight for material favor and power can truly be. So how do we fix this? That brings us to our next section, the prescription, which is all about creating strict boundaries. To stop this chaos from spreading, the Buddhists stepped in and created some incredibly precise physical boundaries. This was a highly targeted intervention to cut off the mind's endless desire for more. Take the number 8, for example. There was a monk named Channa who decided to hoard this massive, wildly luxurious, oversized bed for himself. The Buddha called him out and set a hard rule. A monk's bed legs could absolutely not be more than 8 of the Buddha's fingers high. That's it. It was a direct strike against the human ego's desperate need to show off status through luxury items. And this idea of strict boundaries wasn't just for furniture. It applied to clothing too, as a way to fight off expanding desires. There's a story about a devout woman named Visakha who offered to donate rain-bathing clothes to the monks. Well, once the monks realized they could legally get new clothes, human nature took over, and they started making these robes ridiculously huge. The desire just expanded like a balloon. So the Buddha immediately stepped in and set an exact dimensional limit, no more than 6 spans long. By taking something abstract like desire and putting a hard physical metric on it, the Buddha essentially slammed the brakes on greed. Now, you might be wondering, what actually happens if someone breaks these rules? The procedure was totally uncompromising, involving 3 very specific steps. First, you have to acknowledge that you messed up and wanted too much. Second, and this is the crucial part, you literally had to physically destroy or cut down the excessive item. You had to stall the legs off the bed or cut the extra fabric off the robe. And third, you had to publicly repent to the entire community. Why so intense? Because physically destroying the item you were obsessing over is the only way to effectively kill the ego and arrogance attached to it. Because at the end of the day, it's not just about the size of a bed or a robe, it's entirely about our sense of identity. There's a super relatable story in the text about the Buddha's younger brother, Nanda. He actually looked a lot like the Buddha, and he secretly made himself a robe the exact same size as the Buddha's. When the senior monks saw him walking over from a distance, they actually stood up to welcome him, thinking he was the Buddha. When he got closer and they realized who it was, the whole situation was incredibly awkward. It's a perfect lesson on the cost of chasing identity through external labels. The Buddha made him resize the robe, teaching that true humility means dropping the vanity of using objects to elevate yourself. Which naturally leads us to the deeper why behind all of this, the underlying wisdom, and how this is really all about protecting the mind. Up to this point, you might be thinking, okay, aren't these rules a little bit extreme? But here is the secret. They aren't about punishment at all. They are actually a highly sophisticated psychological tool meant for mental clarity. In the monastic code, there's a specific term for breaking these material rules, pasatitya. It's such a vivid word. It literally translates to boiling, burning, covering, or creating obstacles. It means that when you indulge in excessive material desires, your mind is literally burning, like it's being cooked over an open fire. If you don't repent and hit the brakes, that anxiety acts like a dark cloud, creating a massive spiritual roadblock that totally blocks your path to liberation. This mental burning actually takes a very real physical toll on the body, and the most obvious place it shows up is in how we sleep. The ancient texts specifically point out that when monks started hoarding luxury bedding, like high-end silk and cotton, their minds became so scattered and full of desire that it led to the 5 faults of scattered sleep. Think about it. They had a hard time falling asleep. Waking up was miserable. They were plagued by nightmares. They lacked spiritual protection. And worst of all, when they did wake up, their minds completely resisted entering any kind of calm contemplation. The excess directly destroyed their inner peace. But contrast that with the absolute peace that comes from following the limits. The Buddha required monks to use a very simple sitting mat with strict size regulations, called a nisidana. When you let go of the chaos of luxury and maintain clear, strict boundaries, the benefits are incredible. You fall asleep easily, you wake up refreshed, the nightmares disappear, you feel spiritually protected, and your mind effortlessly drops into deep, meaningful contemplation. It really proves that true peace doesn't come from having everything, it comes from needing very little. So if we distill everything we've talked about today, the absolute core wisdom of this entire explainer comes down to just a few powerful words: fewness of desires and contentment. This isn't about just passively giving up. It's a brilliant, active spiritual strategy. To achieve real spiritual success and true liberation, you have to ruthlessly minimize the external clutter to maximize your internal clarity. That is exactly why the excessive pursuit of material things is such a critical barrier to cultivating true wisdom. As we wrap up today's explainer, I really want to challenge you to apply this ancient wisdom to your very modern life. I want you to ask yourself, what excess baggage do you need to drop today to uncover your own inner peace? Is it actual physical clutter in your house? Is it a desperate need for external validation? Or maybe it's just the constant pressure to keep buying more. Think about it. Shedding that weight might just be the most liberating thing you do all year. Thanks so much for joining me on this deep dive, and I'll see you next time.